Good morning, America. Welcome to A Minute with Mel. In this episode, I will examine the problems with the U.S. immigration policy and offer solutions on how to fix it. Everyone knows that we have an illegal immigration problem, and every past administration has failed to fix it. The current administration has failed even more so and made the situation worse. So what do we need to do to fix the immigration problem? I bought a t-shirt online several months ago, and on the front of the t-shirt is a photo of Native Americans. And below this photo is printed the words, "If you don't look like this, you're an immigrant." So let me put to rest right now that unless you're Native American, you can't tell anyone to go back to where you came from. We're all immigrants in this country that we call America. So, where do we start? Let's look at the legal angle first. And according to Tom Wolfson, a former senior U.S. diplomat who is a member of the Steady State organization, claims it's complicated. And I agree with him. Today, many law-abiding Americans and more recent arrivals who found their way through the thicket of U.S. immigration law see no reason why those who don't want to wait their turn should be allowed to stay in the U.S. However, it's understandable that foreigners would run afoul of the current rules. U.S. immigration law is a book-length mismatch of laws passed at different times and riddled with contradictory provisions and special exceptions. For example, there's no limit on how many visitors' visas can be issued worldwide, and every eligible applicant, that is, those not barred by specific exclusion grounds, is supposed to be issued one. Yet, the law also presumes everyone applying really intends to come to the U.S. and stay. If the applicant cannot establish to the American adjudicator's satisfaction that ties to his or her homeland compel them to return, they would not be issued a visa. Every country has an immigration visa quota. The national origins provisions in our law mean that the quotas for many countries are hopelessly oversubscribed. People will wait years before their numbers come up. This provides a huge incentive to overstay a visitor's visa, and our law does permit even those who overstay to, quote, adjust status, unquote, while in the U.S. That is, such a person is not required to leave the country again in order to apply for an immigrant visa. Not surprisingly, navigating this legal tangle is difficult and possible for many, only with the help of specialized, often expensive attorneys. For example, if India has an immigration quota of 7% of the total annual employment-based green cards, and let's say it's 140,000, India receives 9,800 slots annually. I understand that there's a 20-year wait for an Indian who applies today to receive a green card for the U.S. Thus, an Indian applicant has a few options. He could move to another country like England or Kenya and obtain their citizenship and then apply under their quota system. Or he could obtain an H-1B1 visa with a U.S. company and then adjust status. Or he could travel to the U.S. legally on a visitor's visa, student visa, or business visa, or illegally and then adjust their status upon arrival. Now, given the 20-year wait and some of these other complications, which one would you choose? And that's the dilemma. Interestingly, no one is questioning how Melania Naves, now Mrs. Donald Trump, managed to stay in the U.S. Mrs. Trump, after arriving from Slovenia, allegedly violated, as many other illegals have, the terms of her visitor's visa by remaining in the U.S. and accepting paid employment. Her parents subsequently entered the country in a perfectly legal procedure on the basis of her, by then, legal presence in the U.S. Although there's a reason to doubt whether she actually qualified for the exceptionally accomplished person visa she received. Republicans used to loudly denounce this part of the law, mocking it as chain migration, but they're strangely quiet now. When I served as a diplomat in a country in Latin America with a high illegal immigration rate, it was called alien smuggling at that time. I met with two U.S. senators, Robert Graham from Florida and John Keel from Arizona, who had a strong interest in what the intelligence community was doing to stop illegal immigration from crossing the borders into the U.S. At that time, to be honest, the truth was nothing, because we were focused on the cartels and narcotics trafficking. However, I told the two senators that I would look into the matter and work with Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS at that time, which is now called ICE, to determine if we could at least reduce the number of illegals entering the U.S. I learned that this was not an easy task for numerous reasons. One, many illegal immigrants were paying $40,000 per person for help to enter the U.S., which was a lucrative trafficking business. Some INS and Border Patrol officials, many of whom were underpaid, were suspected of accommodating these entries. U.S. businesses benefited from the cheaper and more reliable labor from illegal immigrants. And the immigration system was badly broken, and neither Congress nor any administration made it a priority to fix it. It became a talking point, and everyone moved on from it. And now that there are more than 20 million illegal immigrants residing in the U.S., Americans are upset, and rightly so, but not for the reasons this administration has been espousing. Millions of Americans have been persuaded that accepting people from other countries into American life is a bad thing. The illegal immigrants supposedly take American jobs, unfairly reap social benefits, do not pay their taxes, and haven't waited their turn to immigrate legally. But overall, these immigrants do the jobs that many Americans refuse to do. They pay their taxes, and they try to work through the immigration system to obtain legal documents. There may be isolated cases of abuse, but as I've said, the majority are trying to work through the legal system to obtain legal status. But what I find even more frustrating is to hear from different immigrants blame other immigrants for the current situation. For example, the Cubans will blame the Dominicans will blame the Venezuelans will blame the Salvadorians will blame the Mexicans, and so on and so on. The only thing I can say to all of this is stop it, because we're not finding a solution to the problem, And basically, you're screwing each other, and it becomes a lose-lose for everyone. So, what are the solutions then? First, there are people more experienced and knowledgeable about the immigration policies than I am. But I can offer the following solutions for considerations based on my experiences. First, I would close the border to everyone seeking to immigrate to the U.S. 6 months to a year, which will allow us to start the process of fixing the immigration problem. Second, I would demand that Congress submit a reasonable immigration bill with solutions and funding, of course. And third, what should the bill contain? Well, first, expedite the process for current green card holders, once validated, who have been in the U.S. for 15 years or more to become U.S. citizens. If they've been in the U.S. for 20 years and not done anything illegally, they're U.S. citizens. So we should expedite that process. 2, anyone who has been in the U.S. for 5 to 14 years can apply for a special category visa to allow them to work legally and live responsibly in the U.S. and begin the immediate process for a green card or some other type of card that shows legality. 3, anyone who has been in the U.S. for 1 to 4 years will be given a work permit, but they must obtain a regular job and has resided in the U.S. without a felony conviction. This also applies to the other applicants as well. 4, transitional workers. They will be granted a special work permit to travel back and forth across the U.S. border to work. Some of this is already in process. 5, revise and shorten the timeline for immigrant visas to be processed for family members who are eligible to immigrate to the U.S. 6, clean up ICE, which is incompetent and mismanaged. Allocate the funds to increase and train ICE and Border Patrol officers. Also increase their salaries. 7, review and revise the law for seeking asylum in the U.S. My point is, I think that asylum seekers should apply only in a third country and not be allowed to come to the U.S. and apply for asylum if they've entered the U.S. illegally. 8, reduce the number of immigrants allowed into the U.S. 9, revise the law allowing a visitor to adjust status after arriving in the U.S. And 10, hire more judges and establish court systems to quickly adjudicate and expel illegal immigrants back to their country and not to some other third country. And to create a tracking system to keep illegal and criminal elements from re-entering the country. Hopefully, you will have even more solutions to help them solve the immigration issue. Thanks for listening. My next podcast will examine the failure of current U.S. foreign policy of the Trump administration. This has been A Minute with Mel.